Perhaps this was maybe too soon to do another live, but why not? I just figured I would come on here and maybe discuss a few things, a broad range of different topics. After what I had done last night, which was a pretty good, detailed explanation of the East and the West and their differences and their origins, and condensing it all into what was just barely over an hour of a stream. I thought I would come on here and, like the title says, discuss the boomeranging effect of globalism, among other issues. But, um, you know, as far as globalism is concerned, it has been nothing but a complete, utter, total failure for the Western bloc, the Western system as a whole, because, like I discussed briefly last night, you had what was brought up was the fact that globalism had been taken advantage of by especially China, whereby they were given all the fruits of it by being able to benefit from their cheap labor and their ability to basically jack our technologies and our industrial prowess out from beneath our feet. Because when the détente period occurred, Nixon opened up the door for all of that to occur, basically. So what happened was China basically received all the aid as far as developing their industries that they could ever desire. And it was lured in by their promises of cheap labor, whereby America was deindustrialized by and large, and many of those plants were sent overseas to China. And thereby was how China became, quote unquote, the workshop of the world. Well, that was nothing but a deal with the devil, because now that they had all the time and ability to take our technology, our industries, and everything out from beneath us, they were able to use that to develop their own and build themselves up into the world superpower. And they basically smiled in our face while holding a club behind their back, by which they planned to club us to death with. And that club is their just monstrosity of a military that they have now, that they were able to build up, that they were able to take our technology and steal all our crown jewels and develop themselves into this monster that they are now. So we've been deindustrialized. That's the other boomerang of globalism. It's come back full circle and knocked us out by hitting us in the head. By being deindustrialized, we no longer have the ability to keep up with China, much less anybody else. And now, with what Western Europe has done by going along with our psychotic policies, as far as using that certain nation in Eastern Europe as a proxy, the Western Europeans, by going along with that, have completely castrated themselves as well. And they also have been deindustrialized gradually over this past year. So much so that they're going along with all this green energy garbage in tandem with being cut off from their main foreign source of energy products, their natural gas and their fuel, and that is Russia, the second most powerful nation on earth in terms of their military power and as far as their resources are concerned, they're the second most powerful country on earth due to having all of that going for them. Because in terms of commodities versus currency, commodities always win out. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you can either have commodities which have inherent value, or you can have useless fiat currency, which really has no value because it's just a piece of paper. It's a bunch of paper. So, really, what you're looking at here is Europe and North America falling by the wayside due to their basically suicidal policies imposed upon themselves in pursuit of this reset, this Western form of a NWO, which they'll never achieve, because when you lack commodities and you lack military power, you can do nothing. You can do absolutely nothing without that. You can do nothing without commodities and resources, and you can do nothing without military power. When you hollow out and castrate your military, you have no way to enforce your policies. And somebody more powerful than you is going to dominate you, and that is Russia and China. They're drastically more powerful than the West could ever hope to be by now because of all that's happened. And even in the past 2 years, we've seen a real drastic change in the overall world situation. But even a few years before 2020, there was really a major shift in the balance of power, because you've seen all these factories and just humongous industrial complexes that China had started constructing toward the end of the 90s and early 2000s. You've really seen them starting to come online and starting to crank out even more in terms of their military production, be it aircraft, be it new tanks, be it, armor personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles and munitions and ships even. The number of shipyards they have is just, it's freakishly huge in terms of their numbers. They have 1,200 shipyards, and their civil military fusion policy that they've put in place allows them to take any automotive or bus factory and turn them into a military production facility. Likewise, any shipyard can be retooled at a moment's notice to produce military ships. Now, they don't really need that, seeing as, they already have just an immensely larger capacity for production than anybody else in the world. Now, we're talking about a country that produces 1 billion plus tons of steel annually. And I say plus because it is a little over 1 billion, but I'm just rounding it down to 1 billion. So they produce 1 billion tons of steel. We'll just keep it at 1 billion, even billion. So in producing all this steel, that translates to military production, and we've really seen this with their, capacity to produce all these military ships and all these aircraft and tanks and everything that they have on the ground, artillery pieces, just the whole gamut of different things. And they're able to crank them out at a rate that has really not been seen since World War II, really. As far as just the level of production that they have already going for them and the capacity. Just even if you look at the tank production numbers, just several years ago, they had less Type 96Bs and Type 99As than they do today by, we're talking several thousand. So that means that in just a span of 3 years' time, they've cranked out several thousand tanks, which is huge. That's a lot considering the level of technology that's in those tanks with the ballistic computers, the combat data link, the gunnery that's on board. Just everything that goes into those tanks. It's in the communications equipment. These aren't like the old World War II type of tanks that were very primitive, like bare bones tanks. These are modern, up to date, like state of the art, state of the industry types of equipment, vehicles. I mean, their ability to just crank this stuff out at such a high rate with these humongous military complexes that they've produced. I mean, it's since the late 90s. It's unreal. It's unreal. We can't compete with them, and they've already had a humongous stockpile of aircraft and artillery and vehicles of all types and ships to begin with. So they've upgraded all their older stuff and modernized it to a massive extent as far as the weapon systems, and they've upgraded the communications, the computer systems, and you can even see evidence of this in the Type 59D, the older tanks that they've had. I mean, these are like really old tanks, but now that they've been upgraded to such a high extent, they're still extremely lethal on the modern battlefield because of all the new equipment that's inside of them, all the new computers and comms, and they've upgraded the armor by adding new explosive reactive armor kits to them. And the guns on board are extremely deadly. I mean, this is just one example of many. I mean, you also see this, with some of the older air defense platforms, and even some of the older armor personnel carriers. They've been extremely modernized and refitted with newer comms and everything else. It's just they keep all their older upgraded stuff and pass it down the line to their parts of their second or definitely to their third rate units, while their first rate and then later second rate, as things get proliferated down the line, you see them getting all this brand new stuff, this state of the art, state of the industry equipment. I mean, we're not even able to keep up with even Russia, much less China. Now, Russia produces more than we have lately. I mean, we're having a lot of our major heavy industries shut down, and all we're left with is these much smaller cottage industry sized factories, complexes, these complexes where, they produce munitions and weapon systems. Compared to what we used to have, we don't have that Cold War / World War II capacity to produce. And we would never be able to get that back were it a, full-scale war type of a situation. Now that is all a direct effect of the boomeranging caused by globalism. Now, as far as like civilian products, Jennifer, my dear Jennifer, she put up a video today, and it had to do with the grains running out that were on the shelves. Now, she has animals that she takes care of, and, they require food, and, also they're going to need hay for the winter, and all of that stuff is running out. And that's just agricultural type of stuff, so there's going to be famines coming. Now, all the stuff that I've warned about in my work, like my documentaries, it's all coming true. It's all coming true. I've said in my documentaries, I've talked about famine. In my internal conflict one, I said that there would be famine in different areas, especially areas that were close to the front lines, where people they'd have their lives disrupted to such an extent, they wouldn't either be able to grow the stuff, or if it wasn't that, it would be that the supply chains would be so broken down that anybody near the fighting going on would not be able to obtain any sort of products whatsoever at all, because there wouldn't be any deliveries going on in an area like that, if at all, So that was in my work. Now, all the issues bubbling beneath the surface are also a direct result of globalist policies. Now, you see these open borders to the south. They're wide open. Now, that was a globalist policy, because what did they want to do? Well, they wanted originally to create this North American Union. It was supposed to emulate the European Union, but it failed. Obviously, it failed. But a legacy of that is the fact that we have these open borders. But that is doing nothing but making it possible for us to be further infiltrated by foreign military units that are here as to cause trouble, for the future invasion, to build up on these CCP regime properties that are all over this nation. We know all about the CCP regime properties. They're everywhere. Okay, so then you have that, but you also have the added complexities that go with the situation that's happening in Mexico with these different cartels and these gangsters and these militants and thugs. Well, open borders allows for them to, cross at will. They can cross at will, and they can do that to seek some form of safety on our side when they're trying to evade the Mexican armed forces. Okay? Well, what is that? That reminds me of the La Raza narco state that was in my documentary series. Does it not? Yeah. So then we also have, the armed forces, as I've mentioned before several times, that the armed forces situation, with them being hollowed out due to these mandates and other issues, you have that setting up for the exact situation I even said it in my documentary when I was doing the intro to the different factions, and I started talking about the Free American Army junta when they were having their discussions. If you listened to the things that were said, that very thing was brought up. Wow. Now that's going on right now in our reality today. So, you have that. You also have this Texas secessionist movement. There's Texas. You have Florida openly challenging these globalist forces of the WEF and their policies, saying they're going to go against them. Well, yeah, sure, there's questionable things as well. There's things that make you wonder, like their legislation that said that they can force certain things on people in an emergency situation at will. Maybe that was done in a flexible sort of way, and by flexible, I mean it was done to appease their globalist overlords for the time being until potentially maybe they would turn on them and also secede, like they did in my documentary. If you paid attention to that, you would see how that all worked behind closed doors. Things are not always what they seem on the surface, everybody. I'm trying to get people to understand. People don't know exactly what happens behind closed doors. You don't know what's really going on behind closed doors. And likewise, sort of like with the one faction, the National Salvation Revolutionary Front, they had secret meetings in different places. Now, that could be a hotel boardroom that they rented out. It could be wherever, They had couriers that carried papers, documents, like their plans, and they couried them to different parts of the country, to different groups that they were associated with. And that was how they performed their coup. Now, there's no question at all whatsoever that such things are going on. Of course they are. There's people with their own agendas, with their own ideologies, with their own plans, that have their own systems at work behind closed doors or just beneath the surface. It is extremely naive to think in a nation of some 340 million people, the third most populated nation on earth, that you don't have people with their own agendas, their own ideologies, their own plans, that are doing their own things behind closed doors. It's extremely naive to think that. And of course, you have your globalist regime, which was also a faction. Now, you have all these different groups doing their own different things. And that is exactly what happened in Syria and other nations in modern internal conflicts. So I say to people, what makes America any different or any more special than any other nation? Nothing. Nothing. Nothing does. And everybody has globalism to thank for where we are today. Where we are today insofar as, China totally playing the West like a harp, like a fiddle, totally playing the West in order that they could get what they needed to build themselves up while we in turn ripped ourselves to pieces. They skillfully played us. And the result of it is a hollowed out, thinned out, collapsing Western world. The West is failing before our eyes. And now that Russia has officially closed off the pipes, so to speak, they've closed off the plumbing, the Western Europeans are not. They're not going to make it through the winter. You're going to see chaos and pandemonium in those Western European nations like you have never seen or imagined before. I even think to some extent it'll be far, far worse than what we even will be dealing with here. And I think things will be pretty bad here, all things considered. And it's not just North America or Europe in Western Europe. I would say it's also going to be Oceania, which is Australia and New Zealand. They're not going to have it good either. And likewise, nor will really Japan or Taiwan, because Japan is extremely resource strangled in that, their chain of islands that comprise their nation does not have the resources available domestically in order that their economy can be sufficiently powered. And that's not only the energy resources, it's also the raw materials that they need to be able to produce things in Japan. So China, being that they have the biggest navy, the biggest and most technologically advanced navy in the entire world, and that's an undisputable fact, China at will can strangle Japan and even Taiwan of resources that are vital to their national survival. And there's nothing anybody can do about it. Because if anybody sails within 1,500 miles of the Chinese coast, or even their man-made island bases in the South China Sea, well, their DF-26Bs and their DF-21Ds will make short work of the large capital ships that are out and about sailing along the ocean. So they also have the biggest submarine fleet in the world too. And we all know what the French submarine Saphir, the old 60s era nuclear-powered attack sub, we already know what the Saphir had done to an entire American carrier group, and that was only one sub, just one sub, an old one at that. So these newer, more advanced Chinese subs with more advanced weapons aboard and quieter, just all around quieter, just engines and everything else. These submarines, and with their more advanced sonar and everything else, they're more than capable of doing what the Saphir had done, but far, far worse. Far worse. So, all that said, things are not looking good for the Western world this winter. Meanwhile, China and Russia are sitting pretty. Oh, they're sitting pretty. China has hoarded so much of the world's food, and I've gone over the specific numbers just a few lives back, if you all went back and watched that. China has hoarded so much of the world's food this year, and they've really been doing it just in many recent years as it stands anyway. But then you have Russia, who had a bumper crop, a bumper harvest, Their money, their ruble, is more valuable than it's ever really been. I mean, it's this they're having an economic boom. Basically, they're having an economic boom. Russia is. China, they're sitting pretty nice too. They've got everything they need. They've been stockpiling everything that they need. They have the world's biggest gold supply, and not only that, but they basically have their Belt and Road scheme going for them, to where they have made such a scheme that they can make vassal states out of all the nations that haven't been able to pay for the projects, such as the ports and the roads and the other modern infrastructure, dams, everything that was built by the Chicoms. Then these nations can't pay for. Well, China gets mineral rights, exclusive mineral and oil rights, and they go in there and they take it. So, and there's nothing these nations can do about it. So basically, China and Russia have everything they need, while the West is falling apart. It's hollowed out. It's literally decaying before our eyes. And Russia and China are now these humongous powers, especially China, but Russia being the second. They're these two major powers that are going to utterly annihilate the Western world when they deem their plans are ready to go, as far as the timeline that they've set for their plans. Now, naturally, being that they're so austere-minded, they're so frugal. In other words, they're cheap the way they do things, because they don't want to have to expend anything as far as resources or money or anything else, where they feel that they can save those things. That's just the way they think. They're chess players. They're very strategic. So if it comes to like a war situation, they are going to basically let the West further weaken itself until it's so weak that it can't even lift a single solitary finger to do anything about them coming in there and taking over. It's extremely cruel and evil, but that's just the way they do things. They want us so weak that we can't even defend ourselves. That is cruel, but that's just how they are. That's how they think. If they see that we're going to tear ourselves apart, they're going to sit back and absolutely let that happen, because it benefits them to do so, because they can save more lives of theirs, more resources of theirs, more equipment of theirs, whatever, than they would otherwise if they just went on in. They'd still crush us if they just went on in, but they would lose more doing it. And they don't want to lose more if they don't have to. That's how they think. I haven't greeted everybody yet. Let me see who's all in here. Oh, I have to push all these buttons. Who's in here? Hey, everybody. Hope y'all are doing good today. See everybody here? Yep. Well, welcome, everyone. Welcome. But yeah, this is just one of those things. Globalism has caused all of these different woes that we're seeing now. It's totally backfired on the West, whereas when these different schemes of the West were initially started, it was all about making money at every turn, and it was only really benefiting the wealthy, because they seen a way that they could profit off of cheap labor from the Eastern world, which ended up backfiring because the Eastern world took full advantage of the West and basically flipped everything on its head by stealing the industrial secrets in order that they could modernize themselves at a more rapid pace than ever before, steal the technology, steal everything, and use it to move on up to replace the West as the dominant power bloc in the world. Now, they're going to basically take what they've done with BRICS, and after World War III, when the East defeats the West and the Western elites are humbled by those of the East, such as Xi Jinping and Putin, all of them, maybe Khan down there in Pakistan, and Kim Jong-un over there, which or his body double, whoever's running North Korea now, all of them. When the Eastern elites humble the Western elites, they are going to have their new world order. The West will be colonized, and the Western elites will have no power. How would they have power to do anything when their entire power block was eviscerated and gone? How? How then would there be any sort of Western New World Order? There wouldn't be. There wouldn't be. What China would do is they would say, no, you can't pay your way out of this. You have no power. Thus, you have no say in anything. We're going to take your money and you're going to be our slave. That is exactly what they would do. That's exactly what they would do. There will be no Western Great Reset. There will be no Western NWO. It'll be an Eastern New World Order. And yes, the 10 kings of the East who are victorious post-World War III, and the 10 kings, I'm referring to the biblical 10 kings that give their power to the beast and reign with him for 1 hour, yeah, those will be Eastern kings. And it'll be an Eastern-centric New World Order. That's not going to be a Western New World Order. And those 10 kings, they will give their power to the beast, though. They will submit themselves to the beast, and they'll reign with him for 1 hour. But I see this whole BRICS thing, which is a direct competitor to the Western Economic Forum. The BRICS will morph into a sort of UN 2.0, a UN 2.0. And that'll be the new UN, and it'll be either run out of Beijing or Moscow. It won't be run out of Babylon because Babylon gets destroyed. So therefore, it's not going to be headquarters here anymore. It'll either be in Moscow, Beijing, or maybe, just maybe, they'll move it to Jerusalem. But that would be after the beast makes his covenant with them to spare them from the very 10 kings who also gave their power to the beast. What I mean by that is that the 10 kings who give their power to the beast will be these 10 Eastern kings. And the beast will tell them, position yourselves like you're going to invade Israel. And then he'll go to Israel and say, worship me and make a covenant with me, and I'll spare you from China, Russia, and all these other kings, So he's going to play them both off against each other and be some sort of cunning diplomat. And he's going to get them to make a covenant. I'm talking about Israel. They'll make a covenant. Why? Because the West is no longer there to protect them. It's the only thing that makes sense. Because the West is the protectors of Israel right now. So if the West is no longer around because they were destroyed and conquered and colonized in World War III, then, therefore, who is then there to protect them? Nobody. That's why the beast goes in there and says, make a covenant with me and I'll protect you from these 10 kings of the East. That way, they're under his protection. But then he breaks his covenant in the middle of Daniel's 70th week. In the middle of Daniel's 70th week, the beast breaks his covenant with Israel. And then everything just goes to total madness and chaos. And then God's wrath begins to really come down. And the one world regime falls apart. Likely due to a mixture of the infighting that always comes about when people are greedy and power hungry, like these 10 Eastern kings will all be greedy and power hungry. There will be infighting. Well, Satan just can't help himself. He always eats his own. Satan always eats his own. Because the greed, the lust for power, and all of that always gets the best of Satan's minions. So that's what's going to happen. It'll be a mixture of that plus God's wrath coming down. But these 10 Eastern kings, they'll be used not just to create a new one world system by giving their power to the beast after they defeat the West in World War III and colonize it. They'll also be used to bring Israel under the beast by a covenant. So that's the only thing that makes any logical, rational, coherent sort of sense when you really look at this issue. So globalism was the boomerang that has originally was intended to subdue the East, but instead the East has now used it to boomerang back around and knock the West directly in the head. You know how boomerangs work. They're supposed to come back. Well, this is definitely coming back with a vengeance. With a vengeance. It's knocking us in the head, folks. It's knocked us in the head in the military capacity, in the military sphere. It's come back and knocked us in the head in the economic and financial sphere. It's also come back and knocked us in the head in terms of just, overall wealth and power, and even just in the civilian sector. Just look at the lack of goods and services and products. It's totally come back and knocked us in the head. All of these self-destructive green policies. Guess who's not doing those things? Guess who doesn't give a rat's ass about those things? China doesn't give a rat's ass about that. That is one of the most polluted countries in the world from industrial waste. Smog, waste, everything. The air, the rivers. China doesn't care about green energy. While we, on the other hand, are deindustrializing and ripping ourselves apart. Even our own power grid is ultimately being sacrificed to this false god of green energy policy. So China is not doing that, nor is Russia. India's not really either. None of the Eastern nations, the real big ones, none of them are doing this. But we are. We are. You have to ask yourself why. Well, because there's two separate sets of elites, as I've articulated well last night. There's two separate sets of elites, Eastern and Western. I've articulated that very well in the last live right before this one. I think everybody should go and listen carefully to that. There's two separate sets of elites. Now, if we were under one set of elites, we would already be under some sort of a one-world system. So we're not, because they're both fighting it out to see who's going to dominate. And it's not going to be the West, because the West has basically castrated itself and eviscerated itself. The whole power base has done evaporated. It's gone. It's over. It's over. And we did most of it to ourselves by this globalist garbage, these policies of trying to make money off of cheap labor and allow not only competitors, but adversaries to come and steal from us. Straight up jack us. They jacked us. And they've used it to build themselves up. While we, on the other hand, have ripped ourselves apart. We've ripped ourselves apart. So, in ripping yourself apart, without even a viable replacement, there's no replacement system going up. I don't see any new, what do they call that? Fourth Industrial Revolution. I don't see any new Fourth Industrial Revolution cities being built. I don't see any new Fourth Industrial Revolution grid being built. I mean, aside from using the current grid to build these 5 to the G towers, I really don't see any sort of real viable replacement system that's there to replace the current system. I'm not for any of that garbage, obviously. I hate the idea of a fourth industrial anything of this Western-centric NWO that most people look at while ignoring the fact that the East has its own plans. I don't like any of it. I don't like the Eastern or the Western plans for a new world order. But I don't see a viable replacement for the West's current system. There is no viable replacement for the West's current system. So if you tear down your current system, if you're a Western nation and you're tearing down your current system and without any viable replacement, no new grid, no new infrastructure, no new cities, no new nothing, then you're basically just committing just suicide. You're done. You're done. You're done. You're finished. You have no way to replace the current system. You've hollowed out your armed forces. You've hollowed out your industry. You've hollowed out your grid, everything, and you have no viable replacement? And you expect to remain viable? Not happening. Not happening. Not happening. So, they're all evil, folks. The East and the West are both evil. But in the East, they have been building themselves up, and they've even built ghost cities. Ghost cities. Do you know what the ghost cities are for, everybody? The ghost cities are for the survivors of World War III from the West who are going to be resettled after being herded through some sort of filtration camps. You're going to be marked with a beast mark, and you're going to be resettled in these ultra high-tech Chinese-built ghost cities. And China has built ghost cities all over the world. Not just in China, but also in Angola. There's even ghost cities in Turkey. There's ghost cities all over the world. Of course, there's that one in Saudi. It's called Neom, or Nome, however you pronounce it. There's ghost cities that are really high-tech that have been built all over the world, mostly by China. Mostly by China. But you notice who's building these. Eastern nations are building these, largely built by China, but, you have your other small exceptions, like you have Saudi building one, you have Turkey building one, but the rest are built by China, by and large. So, those are for survivors from the West, survivors of World War III, who will be filtered through Chi-Com Laogais, i.e. slave camps. They'll be processed through there after World War III, after China's victory in World War III. The survivors of the enemy nations of the West will be filtered through those Laogais, and you'll be resettled in a Chi-Com ghost city. And you'll be some sort of, worker drone or something over there. They'll turn you into a worker bee. Yep. Indoctrinate you with Xi Jinping propaganda. And then the beast propaganda, because once Xi Jinping, one of the 10 kings, gives his power to the beast, well, then I'm sure they'll build a Parthenon like they had in ancient Greece for the gods. I'm sure they'll have their Parthenon for the beast and all the lesser gods like the 10 kings. Because Xi Jinping is worshipped in China as a god. And I don't see him giving up that status unless, when he goes to give his power to the beast says, okay, well, you can keep everything you won in World War III and I won't bother you. Just give your power to me and, you can, you'll be like one of the chief of the 10 kings. I see that happening, or something very much like that happening. So, we're not going forward as we move forward in the future. Really, we're going back in the past to the days of Noah, or the days of the ancient world, where they did have a Parthenon for their many gods, or they had ancient practices that we would look at as barbaric, but were commonplace back then. So, all of this, ultimately, is a result of the seed that was planted years ago, many years ago, the seed that was planted after World War II, and it was called globalism. Globalism. It was the intent, originally, of the West, the people at the time, to use that system, this interconnected globalist system, to make them buckets of money. But it ended up backfiring horribly, horribly. It backfired horribly. And now it boomeranged right back around and knocked him directly in the head. And the West is going to suffer for it. This is going to be a rough winter, everybody. Oh, man, this is going to be a rough winter. So, all that stuff that I put in my work, in my docu-series, my internal conflict one is what I'm talking about now. But also the invasion work, be it my audiobook or my documentaries on the invasion with the battle maps or whatever. It's all the same, typed out stories. They all coalesce into really one bigger work. But like in my hypothetical internal conflict one, the Syrian-style internal conflict, all those different things that were in that storyline were all bubbling beneath the surface, largely unseen by the population. But although it was bubbling beneath the surface, there came a point where it bubbled up to the surface and became a new paradigm seen by all, witnessed by all. It was a new paradigm. It didn't last very long as a new paradigm, but nonetheless, it was still a new paradigm, a new reality. And that was a result of all the problems that had been hidden away for so long, that had been bubbling up beneath the surface. All the poverty issues, all the divisions, be it a class division or a ideological division or whatever, what have you. They all bubbled up from beneath the surface and came to the surface, causing fractures and fissures and chasms to emerge all throughout society. And it just got to be just so horrible that it erupted into first what was classically referred to as quote-unquote civil unrest, but that very quickly morphed into a full-blown knockdown, drag-out sort of a conflict, whereby different factions emerged from behind the curtain, and the curtain was called civil unrest or rioting or whatever. That was the curtain by which these different factions emerged out from behind, because that masked their arrival. It was a mask for their arrival onto the scene. These small leadership corps with their own private armies that grew and grew and grew until they became full-on field armies, just like Syria or Congo or Yugoslavia or Afghan or anywhere else. What made America special? Nothing. So we, like any other nation on this planet, on this world, not planet, but Earth, we have all the same underlying problems as any other nation that's ever experienced such an internal conflict. And Syria was by far the best template to use for that whole scenario, because really, when looking at Syria, and then you look at America, it very easily can have multiple factions all going and fighting against each other, because there's so many. We're vastly bigger than Syria as a country in both land mass and population. If tiny little Syria had so many divisions and sects, like religious sects, or even just the more moderate ones all fighting against each other, then why, in a nation that's so much bigger and more populated, why wouldn't we have exactly the same issues with all the different types of people that are here, race, color, creed, social class, ideological divisions, all of that? Why wouldn't we, being so much bigger and larger, more populated, why would we not have even worse forms of that, of what happened in Syria? Well, of course we would. That's why Syria was such a good template for all of that, because like Syria, there's even more divisions of those exact types between different sects and groups and factions. There's even more of that. And if people don't see it, they're just straight up blind and ignorant, and they're ignoring reality all around them, all around them. Now, for a long time, that sort of thing was really just, kept pushed down. And how was it pushed down? Well, it was pushed down by, relative success, as far as like people being successful in society, being able to have their needs met, their needs and their wants met. Wants and needs are two different things. Needs are your food, your shelter, your water, your the air you breathe, all that stuff. You have needs as a human being, but you also have wants and desires. But in this country, for a very long time, both needs and wants were met by most of the people. Most of the people had their needs and wants met. But when you take that away, all the discontentment that has been bubbling beneath the surface would do what? It would rise to the top. You would see it erupt. Like when you try to hold the lid on a pot of water that's boiling on the stove, you can only hold it down so long. Eventually, it's going to bubble over. Even if you hold it down, the pressure would build and build and build, and it would just erupt. That's just a fact, Same is the case. The lid, in this case, would proverbially be the needs and the wants being met. But eventually, even that wouldn't be enough to stop it, because the pressure build and build and build. And when needs and wants are no longer left, then it just erupts. It just erupts. You can only do that for so long. It doesn't last forever. Nothing in this world lasts forever. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that, that documentary series I made, not only is that the closest thing to reality that you're ever going to see, especially considering that so much of it has already come true and is coming true all around you. I'm not only saying that, but I'm also saying that where things are going, there's no more denying that the future, or future reality, is going to be exactly how those scenarios basically moved and how they ended, insofar as the concepts that were articulated in those series. So the concepts, while the names of the leadership people and the groups might not be, identical, because of course you couldn't know those things ahead of time, the concepts are all very real, and they're all right there. They're all right there. I mean, literally, I'm just blown away at how accurate the research I compiled and put into that presentation really is. Even I am, and I'm the one that made that. When I see these things coming to pass all around me, it's one of those moments where you're just like, wow. I don't know what else to even say sometimes. I just see all these parallels between the work and what's actually happening, and I'm just I don't know what to say. I mean, it's almost mind-numbing, because you didn't expect to call something that accurately, but when you see all these instances of it coming to pass already, before the events even occurred, you're just in shock almost. I don't know how to even say it. I don't know how to articulate it. It's just one of those things that's really surprising, insofar as the research being that good, that it made for that great of a representation of the reality that we're actually going into. Because so much of it is already coming to pass, or even has in some instances. So I said that to say this, is that, this winter looks to be a really, really, really rough time ahead of us. Now, I can't say with a certainty that, this winter is it for sure, but I can say that the way we've been going, the road we've been traveling, phew, man, it's unsustainable for one thing, and it's just not. You can't go on forever on a road that like we've been traveling collectively as a land, even the Western Bloc as a whole, you know. So another thing, there's no real way to really stave it off either. So I would just say this. I hope that everybody has what they need very, very soon. Very soon. You should have everything you need. You want to make sure you have plenty of water and food and defense equipment. You will most likely be encountered by evil forces of some type that has the intent to do you some sort of a harm. You should be prepared to protect yourself and your family and everybody you care about. And you should have everything you need to be able to do that. You should really, if you haven't, or if you don't already have experience and or training, you should really be trying to go and hone your skills in self-defense and defense of others in general. I have resources on this channel already for that type of thing. You're free to review all the material I have, but I really think that people should be getting everything they need and be getting their lives in order, and very quickly, because it looks like this winter, it ain't going to be nothing nice. It ain't going to be nothing nice. So I don't know if this winter is going to be the big collapse, the hard collapse, the big collapse. I don't know if it's going to be that, or if it's just going to be another one of those winters that's just really just dragged out in such a way that, it's painful, but it's more annoying than it is like dramatic, if you understand what I mean by that. I don't know if it's going to be like a slower pain, or if it's going to be an all at once hit you like a ton of bricks sort of a pain. But this winter ain't going to be nothing nice either way. Now, a few years ago, in the winter, in the storm we had down here in Texas, I did have everything I needed. I was well prepped already because, I always take that very serious. And I didn't really suffer like so many other people did. It was annoying. But I did quite well, I've always been preparedness minded since being in the Army, because you always prepare for things in the Army. That mindset always stuck with me, even upon getting out. And I've always been a preparedness-minded person ever since, So I didn't have the issues that so many other people had in that winter storm when it happened. So I had plenty of food and water, even when the pipes froze. When the pipes froze, I could no longer get water out of the tap for things. I had plenty of bottled water, and that was a saving grace from God, that he had me stock up on so much water. Also food, too. And there were a lot of stores that were closed, so having all that food and water was a saving grace. It was a gift from God. So I would strongly urge everybody, get your affairs in order with your food, your water, and your defense equipment and tools. And I suggest you learn how to properly use those if should you ever need to. Because this winter doesn't look good, folks. It really doesn't. So I hope everybody will be as ready as they can be, and is taking this all as serious as they can, because it's looking like it's going to be very, very rough winter. So I thank everybody for being here with me today. I just thought it was important to come on here and talk about how, although these Western elites and uber rich originally planned on globalism to be their, their ideology for the future, they're the ones, along with everybody else. To be fair, everybody in the West, from the top down, because that's how the Bible judges nations and regions. It goes from the very top all the way to the lowest vagabond, the lowest bum. Everybody in the West is going to face very harsh judgment, and nobody will escape. So, globalism, it was the battle cry of these elites for so long in the West, but they'll never have their NWO. It'll be an Eastern New World Order led by the likes of Xi J1np1ng, Putin, Khan, Modi, Kim Jong-un. They're going to have their NWO, and they're going to colonize the West, and they're going to make a new UN 2.0. It'll be their New World Order that rules the world, with the beast as the head, the beast and false prophet, because the 10 kings in Revelation give their power unto the beast for 1 hour. And I would simply add this before I go. Understanding context in the Bible is very important. Now, after I made my one video that addressed a certain individual, I needed to say that, I seen something else from that person. And I would say the context of the book of Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel, is a war. They take place during a war between the Philistines and the Hebrew people. So in the verses that talks about, not resisting your enemy or this or that, they're not talking about an enemy that has the intent to harm or kill you. They're talking about enemies that are like, people in your neighborhood or people you have disagreements with. They're not talking about somebody that has the intent to harm or kill you. Because remember, the book of Samuel, it's 1st and 2nd Samuel, they take place during the war that was fought between the Hebrews and the Philistines. And in 1st Samuel, there's actually one point in that book where the Ark of the Covenant is taken by the Philistines. But it ended up being taken back by the Hebrews. But originally, when they took it, the Philistines, when they took it, it caused plagues to happen to their people. But then the Hebrews, continuing to fight them, got it back. So that context in the Bible is very important. There's a lot of wars discussed in the Bible. There's even going to be a war between the beast and the saints in Revelation. It's there, but the beast overcomes them. But he can't overcome them in a spiritual war, so it's not spiritual. How can the beast overcome the saints in a spiritual war when the saints belong to Yeshua Messiah? If you belong to Yeshua Messiah, you cannot be overcome in the spiritual. You can only be overcome in a physical war. Because once you belong to him, you belong to him. Nobody can take you out of his hand. So that is obviously saying that it is a kinetic physical war. And the beast wins that. But you know what? It's good to know that at least end times Christians are going to have enough balls to stand up against evil. Sure. Some of them, they'll be martyred in other ways, but even if you go in self-defense against evil and you didn't give up the name of Yeshua, then guess what? You were still martyred in self-defense. So even if it doesn't matter how you go and leave this world, as long as you never gave up the name of Yeshua Messiah, then you belong to him. Either way, you belong to him. So that's all that matters. And biblical context is very important when reading the Bible. A lot of what happened in the Bible either had to do with wars or took place during actual war. So when reading some of these verses, people have to understand that context is everything. Context is everything. People really, really need to understand context. So I'm going to leave it at that. And I thank everybody in here for coming. Everybody. Thank you so much. You all have a very, very blessed day today.